I believe that there was always a connection between all the various cultures around the world. And I view yoga as being a universal philosophy, a universal science, and a universal practice, meaning that people from various cultures throughout the world have various practices, meditation, movement, posture, philosophy, conceptions of the nature of reality, the nature of the universe, which are very similar, if not identical, to what we would call yoga. So of course the word yoga is a word that comes from Sanskrit, but in other cultures, their language is used, or words from their language are used to designate what we would call the practice and the philosophy and the way of life, which we call yoga. So in India, we know that yoga has the 8 limbs, and we know that 2 of the 8 limbs are yamas and niyamas.
Dosaradi Ramesh.
Which are your, that's okay, which are your observances and abstentions. And so in ancient Egypt, in Kemet, we had the 42 principles of Ma'at. Ma'at represents the idea that in the universe, that there's an underlying order, that there's an underlying harmony that we should strive to achieve in everything that we do. One of the benefits that India has had is that you had a person, or perhaps even a group of people, who are now referred to as Patanjali. And so the science, the philosophy, the principles of yoga was written down in ancient Egypt, or Kemet. If you look at it historically, yoga has always been passed down orally. And before there was an actual person or group of people who would be the equivalent of Patanjali, the culture of ancient Egypt was sort of stunted by invasions by the Romans, the Greeks, and later on the Islamic invasions that sort of kept certain information from really being maintained in terms of a continuous culture, whereas Indian culture and those ancient practices and ancient principles have been ongoing. So when you look at ancient Kemet, when you look at ancient Egypt, you have to sort of go back and do primary research. And it was from that primary research that we studied the writings, we studied the text, and we also studied the paintings, the carvings that you see on the walls of the temples, that you see in the tombs. We look at what is the symbolism of the pyramid, what is the symbolism of the serpent in ancient Egypt, and we were able to use that information to devise what we now call the system of Kemetic Yoga. And so many of the yoga practices from ancient Egypt are very similar, if not the same, as what you see from India. But we also have certain particular postures or movements which are unique to ancient Egypt. And so what we're going to do, I was told that you all have been wanting to do more poses, more postures, more movement. And so what we're going to do, we're going to do a little bit of, we're going to do a few of these poses. What these poses or what these postures do is that they are very focused on alignment of the spine. So in ancient Kemet, it was recognized that the spine was the place where the life force moved in the body. So not only do you have the spinal, the vertebral column, the bony structure of the spine, you have the spinal cord through which your nerve energy goes, but we also recognize that you have an energy channel that corresponds to the spinal column through which energy flows. And so in ancient Kemet, they use a concept of using analogies to represent different concepts. So the Nile River, which is probably the longest or the second longest river in the world, over 7,000 miles long. The only reason why you have in Egypt is because of that river. That river comes out of Central Africa and it floods and it moves up until it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. But it carries nutrients in the form of soil. And so even though Egypt is a desert, it produces the most food of almost any place in the world because of the fertility of the soil. And so that fertile soil and that movement of energy or life force is analogous to the way that energy moves up the spine. So we would call that spinal channel, we would call that Sushumna Nadi, right? And so the idea that the spine carried energy up to the crown chakra, and that you have various chakras along the spinal column, we see in various ancient Egyptian symbols. We see that concept represented in those symbols. And so the practices, the movements of ancient Egypt could divide it into about 27 really primary practices which are unique to ancient Egypt. And most of them are dealing with alignment of the spine. They deal with opening up the vertebrae that connect the spine together, or they make up the spine. They deal with progressively opening up each chakra from the base chakra all the way up to the crown through slow, controlled, geometric movement that is coordinated with controlled breathing. So in our system of Kemetic Yoga, we observe a principle called Rule of 4 breathing, which means that each breath that we take is divided into 4 parts. And we also combine that with what we call geometric progression. And geometric progression is understanding the exact mechanics of the body and how the body should move in a certain way. It should not just move, willy-nilly. That the body, in order to maintain the health of the body, in order not to injure the body, they just should move geometrically. So geometric means that we're moving the way that nature operates, in the same way that nature operates in terms of creation. In all the creation stories, we are told that before there was anything, before anything came into being, there was just one point. There was just this one. And that from that one point, everything else gradually began to manifest. It didn't just happen at one time, but there was a gradual unfolding of creation. And we see that unfolding taking place now. Even when we look at a seed, and we see how that seed begins to open up, and we see that seed begins to sprout, we see that there's a certain order, there's a certain pattern to creation. And so we want to mimic that pattern when we practice our movements and our postures. We want to mimic that pattern when we perform our breathing, okay? And that is a lesson that is present in all yoga, but sometimes it gets forgotten.